The ANC is having a nightmare start to the holiday season, losing ground in two of its big strongholds in the latest round of by-elections. Here's what happened. So we've just had our second last round of by-elections for 2025, and while the holiday period generally is a joyous time for most, it certainly isn't that way for the ANC. The first by-election of the two that we have to take a look at happened in the city of Ekurhuleni, which of course is one of the biggest metros in the country and in the heart of Gauteng. And over here we saw the ANC retain a ward seat that it held previously. However, they'll be greatly alarmed due to the massive amount of support that they shedded. But before we continue, could I please remind you to subscribe to the channel? It's completely free and all you have to do is click on that subscribe button just below this video. Now let's begin. So if we take a look at the IEC dashboard here, we see that in Ward 109 in Ekurhuleni, the ANC managed to retain their seat with 37.23% of the support. That amounts to 1,586 votes. Interestingly enough, ActionSA came in second, and they're greatly surprised given their previous election results in this ward. They managed to amass over 1,000 votes and got 25.12% of the support. In third place was the EFF with 838 votes or 19.67% support, and then we saw the MK party come in fourth with 624 votes or 14.65%. Now, the reason why I say that ActionSA's support level is so surprising is because if we take a look at the historical data in this area, we see how they really came out of nowhere. So let's take a look at this election tracker to see how the party support has changed over time. The one thing that is immediately clear from the graph is that ANC support has been absolutely demolished in this ward. So in 2016, we see that the ANC got over 5,600 votes or 71.9%, and so they were dominant with a clear supermajority. In 2019, they did even better, with close to 8,000 votes and 75.6%. Now, of course, it's understandable for their results to improve during a national election as opposed to a local election because turnout is normally higher. But then in 2021, they saw their support significantly cut back to 4,476 votes or 68.8%. In the 2024 election, they managed to regain some ground with just over 5,000 votes or 56.5%. But look at how all of a sudden in this by-election, they lost their majority for the first time. They now only have 37.23%. And so this is a devastating result for the ANC, who has clearly lost their dominance. ActionSA is a very fascinating case because after all, they only started competing in 2021, right after they were formed, and in this ward they received 268 votes, or 4.1%. Now bear in mind that that was their breakout election where they seemed to be serious contenders. In 2024, just as was the case nationally, they lost votes here. They only received 160 votes or 1.8% of the vote. And yet in this by-election, they smashed it out of the park, getting over a quarter of the vote and over 1,000 votes cast. And so this was an incredible result for them because normally by-elections have the lowest turnout of all, yet ActionSA managed to multiply the amount of votes that they previously got. So they'll be thrilled with this result. Something else that's very interesting is that there is quite a large number of Setswana speakers in this ward. And what we've seen from ActionSA in previous by-election results is that they've been able to make quite significant inroads in Setswana areas, specifically in Gauteng and in townships, as well as in the Northwest Province. And if you'd like to see a little bit more about this trend, please check out the video above. What's also important to note is that this ward is very close to the border of Mpumalanga, and so it's very much a township ward, very far from DA territory and parties such as those. And so what ActionSA is doing here is managing to bite into the vote of the ANC, but in an area that would typically be almost an ANC monopoly. So a very interesting result. Moving on to the EFF, we've seen them pretty much fluctuate every single election. They had 901 votes in 2016, or 11.5%. They then went up to 1,623 votes in 2019, or 15.5%. And that was before they caved back down to 1,020 votes, although their percentage went up to 15.7, but that's because of lower turnout amongst other parties. In last year's election, they improved yet again with 1,176 votes, or 13.2%, and in this by-election, they got their lowest tally to date, 838 votes, or 19.67%. Now, of course, that 19 is actually the highest percentage they've ever gotten, but they'll be gravely concerned because, after all, they have fewer voters. And during a normal election, when every party decides to contest, unlike in a by-election where only a few do, you've got to really know how to turn out your voters. And so when in next year's election, where you do have everybody competing and voter turnout does go up as it normally would compared to by-elections, the EFF might find themselves in grave danger. Moving on to MK, they of course only started competing in elections in 2024. They did very well in this ward, winning 1,557 votes and coming in second place with 17.5%. But all of a sudden, they've completely crashed out with just 624 votes, or 14.65%. And this yet again follows a very strong trend whereby the MK party seems to be able to retain a lot of the wards that they led in during last year's election. However, in every single one of them, it seems that they generally decline in votes as well as percentage, even if they hold. And here we see another instance where they did very well, but they completely crashed out and lost a lot of support. So those are sort of the two things that happen. Either they managed to retain a place where they had the lead before and lose results, or in the areas where they weren't that popular to begin with, they completely crash out. And so ultimately, the only party that will be really thrilled with their result in this by-election is actually ActionSA. Moving on to our second and final contest in this by-election round, and things did not get any prettier for the ANC. This time, we saw them face another decline in support in Ward 6 in Theewaterskloof. That's in the Western Cape. So, the ANC managed to retain their seat with 674 votes, or 32.51%. But coming up very close was the Patriotic Alliance. They got 507 votes in what was a significant result for them. That translates to 24.46%. In third place was the DA. They'll be slightly worried with their result. They only got 421 votes, or 20.31%, and trailing quite far behind them was the EFF, with 183 votes, or 8.83%. We then had a string of other smaller parties, with Good being the biggest amongst them, but they only got 107 votes, or little over 5% of the vote. And then MK, as we see, did very poorly. They only got 37 votes, or 1.78%. And so if we delve a little bit deeper into the historical trends here, we'll see exactly why this is such a great result for the PA and devastating for the ANC. So in this ward, there were 5 parties to keep an eye on. If we take a look at our graph, we can see how yet again the ANC has plummeted, whereas there's only one party that seems to be growing substantially, and that's the Patriotic Alliance. So the ANC had over 1,100 votes in 2016 over here for 44.7%. They then increased their domination in the 2019 election with 1,368 votes, or 54.1%, before crashing out in 2021, where they only received 745 votes, or 48.9%. In the 2024 election, they managed to slightly recover with 941 votes, or 49.45%. But now in this by-election, they have less than half the votes they received at their peak in 2019, with just 674 votes, or 32.51%. Coming very close behind them was the Patriotic Alliance. The first election where the Patriotic Alliance contested here was 2021, where they received 96 votes or 6.3%. In the 2024 election, they got 132 votes or 6.94%, so a respectable result, before really bursting onto the scene in this by-election. Here they got 507 votes, almost 5 times as many votes as they did in 2024. And then, of course, we saw them rocket into second place, overtaking the DA, the EFF, and the Good Party. So coming up on the Good Party, which is a natural rival for the PA, particularly in the Western Cape, we see that they did not compete in 2016, but in 2019 they received just 33 votes or 1.3%. They did fairly well in 2021, getting 104 votes or 6.83%, before slipping in the 2024 election to 71 votes or 3.73%. In this election, they surprised by growing to 107 votes, so the most that they've received, and that was 5.16% of the vote, but of course still a very small percentage compared to the other parties. Moving on to the DA, and they'll be slightly worried by this election result. See, in 2016 they received over 1,100 votes here, or 45.7%. But what is important is that this ward has been redistricted a few times, so it's very likely that a lot of their votes back then are from people who now live in other wards, simply due to the borders being redrawn. So I wouldn't look too much into that. In 2019, we saw them slip to 909 votes, or 36%, before falling down to 478 votes in 2021, or 31.39%. Unfortunately for them, it's just been a constant downhill from there. They fell to 451 votes in the 2024 provincial election, or 23.7%, before sliding down to 20.31%, or 421 votes in this by-election. The EFF is probably the most difficult party to actually track, because they've had a real roller coaster ride in this ward. They had 111 votes in 2016, or 4.4%. They then fell to 96 votes, or 3.8%, and then they got 71 votes, or 4.66%. But then, just as it seemed as if they were down and out, they almost doubled their vote to 141 votes, or 7.41%. And in this by-election, they got their best ever result at 183 votes, or 8.83%. And so while the ANC did manage to retain the seat, they'll be incredibly worried. They've more than halved their votes in this specific ward since 2019. And as for the Patriotic Alliance, they seem on course to pretty much demolishing everybody as they establish their dominance in this ward. And so ultimately, it was a devastating night for the ANC, which really just seems to sum up the kind of year they've had when it comes to by-elections. As we've noticed, the ANC just seems to be losing everywhere they go, marking a real turning point in South African politics. With this trend in mind, next year's election will surely be an interesting one to watch, especially when you have other parties such as ActionSA and the PA potentially picking up the pieces. Thank you very much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please remember to subscribe to the channel for more content. Until next time, I'm Matthew Cohen, and this is the Power Pod.